everyone. Good evening to Vice-Chancellor Professor Adam Habib, Vice-Chancellor Designate Professor Zeblon Vilakazi, the Honourable former Justice Edwin Cameron, Sir Sydney Kentridge, widower of Felicia, Lady Kentridge, who is joining us online from the UK, daughters and sons of Lady Kentridge and Sir Sydney, namely Catherine, Eliza, Matthew, and William, and members of the Kentridge family and Kentridge family friends, some who is joining us via Zoom and some who is here with us in person. Former Chancellors of the University, Justice Dikhan Moseneke and Justice Richard Goldstone, former Justices of our courts, including Justice Albie Sachs and Ivo Schatzman, Deputy Vice-Chancellor Ruxana Osman, Dean of the Faculty of Commerce Law and Management, Professor Imran Valodia, Director of the Law Clinic, Davin Das, members of the Judiciary and Legal Fraternity, colleagues and friends of Wits. Welcome and good evening. We have people joining us virtually and face-to-face, so a very big welcome on behalf of the School of Law. I am Professor Wissal Domingo. I'm the head of the School of Law, and I will be your MC for tonight. On behalf of the school and the office of Professor Adam Habib, welcome to the Felicia Kentridge Annex Plaque Unveiling. We are naming the building which houses our law clinic, the Felicia Kentridge Annex, home of the Wits Law Clinic. And I say home to the Wits Law Clinic because we have the Kentridge family with us, and it is home to you, and it has always been home, I hope so, to Felicia Kentridge at the time that she was with us at Wits as a lecturer, and then most importantly, as someone who took our students to certain areas outside of the university and started what we now know as the Wits Law Clinic. So Felicia Kentridge has a long and distinguished association with Wits. She studied and lectured at Wits in the 1960s. In 1973, she established the Wits Law Clinic, which, by some accounts, was the first such institution in South Africa. The clinic provided free legal advice to those who, as a result of apartheid, had no access to legal services. Felicia Kentridge was the pioneer of public interest law in a time when no one else would provide these services. Although this put her at odds with some in the legal profession, she played a major role in building the fields of public interest and human rights law in South Africa. 2020 marks 51 years since she began supervising Wits Law students in 1969. This was the first project of its kind in the country, with students, volunteers, providing free legal service to those who was most in need. With this innovative program, Felicia laid the foundation for the establishment of the Wits Clinic for 4 years later after she started taking students out, and set a trend that South African universities followed. And I want to say South African universities followed because about a year ago we had our CHE review, which is the Council of Higher Education that reviewed the LLB program. And one of the things that they commended Wits on was the Wits Law Clinic. It is one of the things that stood out in that review, and all the other universities were told to look at Wits as an example of a functioning law clinic. And so that was a proud moment for us, not only 50 years ago, but also last year when we got that huge commendation from the Council of Higher Education. And that's one of the flagstones of our LLB degree. So our guests for tonight, and I'm keeping it very short because we have the Zoom virtual colleagues joining us as well. Our guest speakers for tonight are the Honourable Retired Justice Edwin Cameron, who served at the Constitutional Court. We will have William Kentridge, Felicia's son, Davin Das, the Director of the Law Clinic. We will also have speaking Alicia Raymond, which is one of our young attorneys who heads up the refugee unit at the clinic, and Professor Philippa Kruger, who needs special mention here. Professor Kruger is the oldest practicing law clinician in the country. She has been at the clinic, and Philippa, you can correct me, I think for over 30 years, or 30 years. 32, there we go. Professor Philippa Kruger will be retiring at the end of this year. So the format tonight is that Davin Das will spend about 5 minutes telling us briefly about the clinic at present, after which Alicia and Philippa will spend about also 5 minutes reflecting on the clinic. I think Philippa will tell us about the past, and Felicia a little bit about what she's doing in the refugee unit. Thereafter, William Kentridge will speak about his mother, and this will be followed by Justice Cameron, who will spend 10 minutes reflecting on Felicia Kentridge's work and how the Wits Law Clinic and the School of Law should take forward her vision. After Justice Cameron's reflections, our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Adam Habib, will unveil the naming plaque and then read the description. And for those of us who are here in person, dinner will be served after that. So I'm going to now hand over to Davin Das.
Distinguished guests, all protocol observed. It gives me great pleasure to address you here tonight. My name is Davin Das, and I'm the director of the Law Clinic. In this regard, I note that Mahatma Gandhi said it best when he said, "Be the change that you want to see in the world." Felicia's devotion to service, her amelioration of the most vulnerable and marginalized, are the efforts which underscores and underpin the seminal statement made. It is in fact when she took a handful of students down to Riverlea in 1969 that this devotion to service manifested with what we have here tonight, and which we're here to honor. I note that insofar as the Law Clinic is concerned, we can talk on what we are currently, which is a fully fledged and accredited law practice, employing 8 supervising attorneys, 2 recently admitted attorneys, 10 candidate attorneys, and 5 administrative staff. But the detail of numbers is important because over the last 6 years, the Law Clinic has consulted with over 48,000 clients, has opened up over 4,100 files, and has trained over 2,105 students in practical legal studies. And so when we talk on impact, it's the impact of Felicia which manifests in each of these individuals. But at the heart of it, it's about people. It's about people who make a difference. It's about people who stand here today as myself, products of the work done. And so tonight, for me, when we engage in the notion of honoring the memory, honoring the contribution of Felicia, this lies in the fact of the furtherment, the progressive nature of the seeds that she sown all those years ago. Because today, the Wits Law Clinic stands as a hub. It stands as a hub of service, of intellectual discussion. It stands as a hub, yes, with challenges, but without challenges, how can we then carve out innovative legal solutions? We endeavor to offer legal assistance across 6 specialized areas of law, and we can boast to also, as our head of school has pointed out, have the longest serving clinician amongst us in the form of Philippa Kruger. We have specialist litigators who litigate against the Minister of Police, Minister of Home Affairs, and very recently we've also now, under the directorship of Philippa Kruger in terms of the family unit, engaged in litigation against the Minister of Home Affairs. To this extent, it is the efforts of the amazing people of the Law Clinic, all the attorneys and candidate attorneys and administrative staff who I've alluded to, who continues that vision and that passion, the passion of making a difference. And so the thought I leave you with tonight is, as all those years ago, Felicia aimed to inspire This continues today through the hard work of the staff members of the Wits Law Clinic. I thank you.
Thank you, Davin. I'm going to call Philippa Kruger.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, distinguished guests. It's a privilege to stand before you tonight. This is my 32nd year at the Law Clinic, and I must say I've enjoyed every year of it. I can't say every minute of it, but every year of it. And what makes it special is something that Felicia Kentridge started in 1969, was not just the commitment to social justice and to try and right the wrongs of that era, but it was taking the students to the Rivoli Law Clinic, which became known as Witsco, in 1969. And it was the training of the students, and at that time, and for many, many years thereafter, privileged students who then had their first encounter with the brutalities of the day and were able to assist the individual clients who were struggling with past laws and the like. In 1973, the clinic started on campus, and it was called the Campus Law Clinic. And it was mainly in an advice office, but at the time, it too trained students. There were lectures. They advised mainly staff members and fellow students. And so the work of the Law Clinic continued until about 1989, when the leadership of the law school brought in specialist clinicians from the United States, and in particular Clinton Bamberger, whom I think was friendly with Sir Sydney and Felicia Kentridge. And he taught us how to teach clinical law, how to teach the students to practice the law, and to teach them to learn through the practice. And this continued from 1990. We became a fully fledged law office, and we would start representing people in court. It started off small, but it was then a compulsory subject for all final year law students. And you can imagine the final year law students have grown exponentially since those days. I think there were about 64 when I started. Now we have about 320. At one stage, we had over 500 students, and they all require personal supervision. And it's a wonderful way to teach, because you're teaching the students, and at the same time you are helping the poor of the greater Johannesburg community. I do want to mention that there was a time too that the university sent the law clinic, was able to get funding to send the law clinic to the rural facility. And that for me was a very special time. We'd go up once a month. I'd just tag along with students who would then consult with the students, with the local population in Bushbuckridge. The problems there were very different from the problems in our urban area. I remember a very distinguished old man who didn't have an identity document. And he came to the law clinic to consult with the student so that he could obtain an identity document. We couldn't speak the language, but he managed to communicate that this was what he needed, and he didn't know how old he was. So we used to use other ways of getting the information, and so we asked him, how old were you when the locusts came? And he showed us with his hand how big he was when the locusts came. And so we could, I think it was in 1931 the locusts came. And so we could assist him and open a case. Now, what we've managed to do over the years is provide training to the students and to the candidate attorneys. And at the same time, we've provided access to justice to hopefully each and every client who walks through the door. For us, it's important that we deal with the individual client. We haven't sought glory in the courts to necessarily change the law, but we have managed to do that nonetheless. We have over 30 reported cases, and many of them started with individual clients, such as Mashaba versus Cusin and Woods, where our client was a young lady who started her articles. She found out, well, she was about to start, she'd been there for about 6 months when she found out that she was pregnant, and she was fired. And so this matter was taken to the Labour Court by the Wits Law Clinic, and Justice Zondo, in fact, gave a judgment in favor of the young lady. There are many other cases, and I can't tell you all of them. Peter Geordie is an insatiable litigator, and he has changed the law in many, many respects, and it's just by taking the man off the street or the woman off the street with and affording them the dignity and the courtesy of listening to their story, and where we could, with the help of students and teaching students at the same time, taking the matter to court, and in the case of Fosie, to the highest court in the land. But we had many, many cases in the Constitutional Court as well. And I do just want to conclude by acknowledging the leadership of the law school throughout the years. It started with Prof. June Sinclair, Etienne Mirainik, Carol Lewis. All the heads of school have strongly supported the law clinic and made it into the great institution that it has been over the years, and I hope it will continue to be that. Thank you.
Philippa, I can assure you, under my leadership, I will give utmost support to the clinic, and it will continue. Alicia?
Good evening. Sorry. Good evening. I was asked to speak to you tonight why, after 47 years, the Wits Law Clinic remains important today, as well as the work that I do. Now, I've been a little naughty because whilst writing my speech, it dawned on me that I could not speak to the work that I do without speaking to the work that all my colleagues do as well. So I'm going to speak to the clinic as a collective rather than just relating it to my individual work. The idea of what I wanted to say tonight immediately came to my mind. And the reason for this is because one of the fundamental tenets that underlie clinical legal education as a teaching methodology is the inculcation of social responsibility, social values, and social justice in law students. We understand social justice to be a system of values and consciousness, predicated on an innate sense of justice and Ubuntu, which enjoin every socially responsible person to take positive action for the betterment of fellow human beings and society at large. The aim is ultimately to attain a basic set of entitlements for all people, which at the very least must include human dignity, freedom, equality, and justice for all members of society. Aiken aptly describes social justice teaching as preparing students for justice readiness, and she asserts the following view: everything a lawyer does has to do with justice or injustice, sometimes on the surface and sometimes in the background. Justice is about doing, and clinicians are among the only faculty in law schools who teach students how to do law. They ought to teach within a context of justice, showing the effect that all lawyers have on society. If clinical faculty throw up their hands and abdicate their responsibility to the poor and the oppressed, they reinforce the ideological justification for oppressive social orders. In South Africa, those social justice issues were a consequence of apartheid and the institutionalized oppressive laws and dire socio-economic conditions it shaped. Apartheid has ended, and South Africa has operated under a constitutional democracy for more than 2 decades. While the effects of apartheid are undeniably still rife, in modern South Africa, it is no longer the immediate basis for conversations relating to social justice today. Yet the reality is that social justice remains as relevant as it has ever been, albeit in a different guise. The contemporary social justice issues faced by South Africa includes HIV and AIDS epidemic, widespread indigence and poverty, corruption, poor service delivery, a lack of meaningful transformation, and high crime rates, to name a few. Considering the innate relationship between clinical legal education and social justice, it behoves us as clinicians to endeavor to redefine and reconceptualize the nature of social justice as it applies today, in order to teach clinical law students meaningful lessons about social justice and its importance. This is an onerous calling, because should we fail to do our jobs, we would be complicit in perpetuating a new and some old body of political, social, moral, and economic tribulations that plague post-apartheid South Africa. For us as clinicians, it is critical that students should be actively engaged in the resolution of their clients' legal problems or disputes. A failure to involve them in this way would mean that we are just relaying whatever practical skills are required to be taught, instead of actually teaching the student through the experiential method in clinical legal education, and would thus deny students a crucial learning experience overall. We always remember that we are preparing students for justice readiness. Without an understanding of the nuanced socio-economic realities of the South African majority, law students would enter into the profession without a worldview, divorced from reality. They may lack the awareness of social problems and require them to act for they may lack the awareness of social problems that require them to act for the betterment of fellow human beings and society at large. And they will in no way contribute to the strengthening of democracy or constitutionalism. This could have the effect of compromising the stability of South Africa's relatively young democracy. We as clinicians enlighten law students about the truth by exposing them to the members of society who are directly affected by the general lack of equity and justice. By engaging in clinical work, students learn that even though apartheid has ended, the effects of its injustices are so far-reaching that they extend to and may still affect many South Africans in contemporary South Africa. And this is just one of the many reasons why the Wits Law Clinic remains so important and will continue to do so. Thank you.
I'm now going to call on William Kentridge, Lady Kentridge's son.
Thank you, Mr. Vice-Chancellor, Vice-Chancellor Designate, and all of you who have kindly come this evening for the naming of the Annex after my mother, Felicia. Hold on to the outrage was in a way her motto, which sustained her throughout her life and which was so evident in so much of how she went through her life. I remember, I suppose, slowly getting a sense of the world that my parents lived in through the dinner conversations that would be had, both from when I was a very young child in the 1950s and going up through into the 60s. And both my parents worked at Innes Chambers, my father in group 621 on the 6th floor, and my mother, I think, on the 10th floor. And there was a sense that my father was at work the whole time, every night. And my mother would come home at lunch, and she'd be with her children after lunch. And gradually became aware that the talk at supper was almost always about the cases that my father was doing. Now, when my father got angry, when he gets angry, he rubs his nose. It's a very characteristic gesture he has of rubbing his nose and jiggling coins in his pocket. Then you know there's hell to pay somewhere, either with the family or with what's happening in court. And I had a sense then that this would be mirrored in a way by a rage that my mother would feel and express, which was directed very much towards the judges who say the name Percy Utah, and she would be frothing. Justice Rumpf, Percy Cillier, Justice Cillier. These were all kind of household words that were filled with a sense of outrage all around them about what had happened day by day in the different courts and cases. But at the same time, there was a sense of my mother's dissatisfaction with her own practice. It was an era in which it was very difficult for women advocates not simply to be assumed that they would do divorce cases or custody cases. So the kind of work and the kind of cases that my father was doing never came towards my mother. And it gradually became clear that this was more and more of a frustration. And our outrage was directed both at the larger social forces of what was happening in the legal and other world, new laws as they came in the 1960s under grand apartheid, but also against the restriction she felt in what she had to do as a lawyer under those circumstances. And at a certain point, she came to the view that, particularly for women, it was essential not just to take the jobs that were there, but to construct a new possibility for herself. And the establishment of the Law Clinic at Wits University and later on the Legal Resources Center, the two large projects of her life, had to do with a sense also of being determined not to be stuck in a particular position that she was put in, but to create a new possibility, a new job, a new range of things she could do. And I remember her excitement. This was when I was just finishing matric in the last years of high school and in the late 1960s and early 1970s, of a conference that she went to with my father in Durban about legal aid, and then a period when they spent at Harvard in the early 1970s, 6 months or so there, at which she had very close contact with lawyers like Clinton Bamberger, and where she got enthused about the possibilities of a practical legal education. In the years before this, she'd done a lot of work with NGOs, with cultural organizations like AMDA, the African Music and Drama Association. She was very closely connected to Dorke House. But in a way, these were very separate from her professional life as an advocate. And the possibilities of clinical legal training, where she could both be involved with clients that were not necessarily just commercial clients that came to see her, but that would have a connection to the broader South African questions while still working within her skill and her training as a lawyer, fired her up immediately. And throughout, there was a sense of a different energy, optimism, and life in what she was doing. And this started, as said, with taking some students to Rivoli in 1969, and then when the when the campus law clinic started in 1973, was for her a kind of a new life. Her children were slightly older. She could give herself more wholeheartedly to the project she had. And you had a sense that with all the clients that were there, with all the different cases, whether it was whatever the particular issues being brought, there were so many issues that made her boil with a rage about what was being done to people in this country in so many different ways, and so many different laws and restrictions, and cases of, even when the law wasn't there, just of gratuitous cruelty towards people, a bureaucratic life in which your fate would be decided by some low-level bureaucrat, in which it was impossible to not be crushed by what was around. And this sustained her, and it sustained her in what she did with the law clinic. And from that came her idea for the Legal Resources Center. And the law clinic, the principle was that you would have students who would deal with real clients and real cases, supervised by a qualified lawyer, qualified attorneys. But that legal training wouldn't simply consist of theatrical cases, of moot cases, of virtual cases that before then was what the closest thing to clinical training that law students had. And the LRC, the Legal Resources Center, was a sense of development of it, saying, well, we've seen how this works and the need for a legal system that can accommodate clients that don't fit into a normal commercial world. And so there was the idea for a permanent law firm, which was different from, of necessity, students passing through the law clinic, and that it should be staffed by not just junior lawyers and people learning the law, but also with senior lawyers to be able to take on their opponents, and that it should try to find cases which have a general application. And all of these things have their roots in what she discovered and learnt and pushed at the law clinic at the university. We know that she'd had enormous success in persuading very senior lawyers such as Arthur Chaskelson to join the Legal Resources Center. And in a way it felt like a vindication. Those projects, both of them, felt like a vindication of all the dissatisfactions which had galvanized her in those years. I remember so clearly from my childhood. And even within the university, there were times when she felt the clinic itself, the idea of clinical training, was rather looked down upon by some of the more academic members of the faculty. And so for her, it would have been remarkable, and she would have been so pleased to know that her work here was being recognized. And I know I can speak for my father in London, who is watching this on Zoom, to say how happy and proud he is to have this recognition for my mom shown here today. And again, just to remind you, hold on to the outrage. Thank you.
William, thank you for those personal words and those stories. I want to say we still continue to hold on to the outrage because there are many injustices still. And internally at the law school, we still kind of have those fights between the academics and a little bit of our clinicians. And I just want to say that after so many years, we are only now, I think it was about 3-4 years ago, and the clinicians can attest to that, that clinical, practical, legal education has become a discipline in which academics are now writing on. And they are doing PhD theses, and I think we have one academic who has received a PhD, and she is now, everyone is flocking to Wits to have her as a supervisor. But it's interesting to see that it's taken so long, even for practical legal education, to become an actual discipline to be written on. So thanks. I'm now going to hand over to the Honourable Justice Cameron.
Good evening, everyone. Vice-Chancellor, Vice-Chancellor Designate, my colleagues De Gang and Richard and Elby, and everyone here this evening, especially the Kentridge family and Anne, and the grandchildren in Sydney, in London, and your relatives in London as well, Matthew and Janet and others. I want to tell you two important things before I start my speech. The one is that in 2003, I gave a talk at the opening of the law school, and sitting in the front row was a young man with a T-shirt on. He reminded me of this tonight, and the T-shirt said, "God's gift." And I asked the young man if he would stand up, and I explained for the rest of my opening talk why lawyers were the God's gift to South Africa's future. That young man is now the head of the law clinic. Please stand up again. The second important thing I have to tell you is that the law clinic was the site of the only job from which I've ever been sacked. One of Felicia's successors was a very rigorous and imposing person like Felicia herself, Anne Harris, who was the spouse of the chief rabbi, Rabbi Cyril Harris. And she asked me one year to be external examiner in practical legal studies, the very course that William has spoken about, which Felicia and others founded at the law school. It was a tough job because there were hundreds of scripts. We sat in my office for hours. I applied myself as well as I thought I could. And the next year, I set aside time thinking I was going to be invited back and wasn't. So I saw Anne in the corridor. I said, "Anne, aren't we going to speak about external examiners?" She said, "No, I need someone who's got more time." So I got sacked from being the external examiner. And Anne confirmed that story at a different occasion. So I'm really very pleased to be here. My roots at Wits go very deeply back to my first month in the Wits Law Faculty Tea Room, where I met Arthur Chaskelson, Jeff Budlander, and Felicia Kentridge. And my association with Wits over the next 40 years has been intricately associated with all these people. Felicia was an immediately arresting person. She had enlisted Arthur, then one of the most senior and respected counsel at the Johannesburg Bar, in realizing a new vision for public interest law in South Africa. She and Arthur and John Dugard, who the previous year had started the Center for Applied Legal Studies, a bold and innovative vision for academic lawyers in South Africa to combine academic theory with rigorous practice. The three of them conceived the Legal Resources Center. Felicia envisaged no less an idea than permanent full-time lawyers of great stature which would help fight injustice through the law. More importantly, together with Arthur and Jeff, they initiated an entirely new course, which is the course that William has spoken about, Practical Legal Studies. On my way here, I spoke to one of William's classmates in matric at KES, Gilbert Marcus, a distinguished senior counsel, and he said what he learned in that course from Felicia and Arthur and Jeff still resonates in his practice today. Generations of Wits lawyers have learned the craft of legal services, legal service, and public interest methods. Times were bleak, and that's the main point I'm going to make after talking a bit about Felicia. Times were very bleak, but Felicia's vision was strong, and it has been profoundly vindicated. 26 years after apartheid formally ended, the LRC continues to be a respected mechanism to try to secure justice under our Constitution, and continues to serve the poor and the dispossessed. And Janet, I'm very glad that you are here this evening. Where's Janet, love? Yes. Lovely to see you, Janet. It has been particularly effective over the last 36 years in bringing test cases. Felicia's legal career, which William spoke about, is reflected in a number of reported cases, at least 5. Many practitioners of that era would be proud to have 5 reported cases associated with their names, William. And of course, she was Arthur's junior in one of the 2 pivotal cases that actually brought the enforcement of the pass laws to a juddering end in the early to mid-1980s. The case that she was junior with Arthur was Kumani versus the Bantu Affairs Administration Board. Another case, Ricotso, the 2 of them made it impossible for the apartheid government to continue to enforce apartheid laws, and by 1985 they gave up. It was Felicia's driving determination and questing vision that helped make all of this possible. And William, Sydney, which lawyer could not feel overshadowed by Sydney? But which lawyer will not concede that from an historical institutional point of view, Felicia's work in helping start the LRC leaves as great a legacy as Sydney's lawyering in practical cases could hope to do? That legacy has acute and poignant significance in our country tonight, and this is the point I want to make. It is no exaggeration to say that the rule of law in our country is under threat, and with it, all our high constitutional aspirations. The very idea that Felicia and Arthur and Jeff and Godfrey Pitchie and Sydney and, in fact, Mandela and Tambo, in founding their law firm down in the city centre in the 1950s, that idea that law and its institutions should be committed to human dignity and to social justice and to making institutions function in service to the people. The threat comes from various sources. First, from increasingly destructive, demagogic, racist rhetoric. I'm not being controversial, ladies and gentlemen. I have a Vice-Chancellor who's taken them on personally. Professor Habib, I admire your courage in doing so. He's courageously criticized those racist demagogues, and that rhetoric has in common, I think, much with the rhetoric of the President of the United States, in that it is bellicose, menacing, and narrowly nationalistic. You didn't want me to come here and be uncontroversial. That's the one threat. The second is from the deliberate and systematic destruction of independent institutions that the Zuma years actively and vigorously promoted. But also third, and here's my point, from a growing sense of alarm and despair about the constitutional project itself, including amongst many of us lawyers. It is in this that Felicia's life and work speak most eloquently to us today when we honor her with unveiling this plaque. The years in which she and others worked at Wits to pioneer clinical legal education and later to create the very notion of a legal services clinic attached to a law school, which is now commonplace, those years were years of greater hardship and more dismal prospects than we have now. They were years of white supremacist triumphalism. They were years of harsh repression. They were years of increasing militarization of the apartheid state and of connivance with apartheid by those very judges, Pitzley and others that William has mentioned, all but a few judges who were strong-minded and principled enough to take stands against the racial iniquity that the legal system was enforcing. These were dark years, and as we indulge ourselves now in the luxury of armchair criticism and of self-indulgent despair, it is worth reminding ourselves of those years. Felicia's life stands tonight as a rebuke to that self-indulgent despair. She and her cadre of public interest law comrades kept working. They kept working not just because there was no alternative, but because they believed in the power of law and reason and debate and justice. They believed that the law was an instrument to secure greater justice. That principle underlies the Wits Law Clinic. It underlies the passion of the Wits Law School teaching over the last 60 years. And they were, of course, triumphantly vindicated when the Constitution, which is now in peril, was adopted in 1994. But it is far too early for us to indulge in despair and also fundamentally mistaken. We have tools that Sydney and Felicia and Arthur and John Dugard and Jeff Budlin and Godfrey Pitchie never dreamed of having. We have the Constitution and its soaring aspirations. We have allies in an outspoken media and in the brave civil society sector, which continues to nourish the fundamental notion that law is about attaining justice. And most importantly, we have allies in effective public interest law organizations, including Lawyers for Human Rights, the Legal Resources Centre, Section 27, SERI, and others. And of course, we have the academic sector itself, where brave and outspoken people will not be silenced. I'm teasing you, Adam. No one seems to recognize that, but I honor you. Please stand up, Adam. And let me add to this, ladies and gentlemen, we have a government, however much enwrapped in a Sisyphean struggle against looting and corruption and denigration of institutions, that has formally pledged itself and is led by someone whose seriousness of purpose, I believe, in pledging himself against those malpractices. Wits itself mirrors the persistence and courage of public interest lawyers under apartheid. As an institution, it continued fighting for non-racialism and equality through hard, nearly unimaginably hard times. Not perfectly, by any means, but by its best lights. So, Dean, Vice-Chancellor, ladies and gentlemen, Sydney family, colleagues, this event, this ceremony, in all its poignancy of memory and of respect, it calls us to renew our commitments to justice, to fairness, to legal access, and to services. Thank you.
I'm not going to say much about Justice Cameron, but each time he visits the law school and gives a speech, my cell phone goes off because I have the press on my back. Did you record what he said? But I'll end there. So I'm going to call now on Professor Adam Habib, our Vice-Chancellor, to honor Felicia by unveiling the plaque.
So, Sir Sydney, William, Anne, members of the family, friends, colleagues, we are at Wits, so I'm going to say comrades, welcome to this unveiling ceremony. You know, Felicia lived an incredible life. And I have some words here, but it seems to me that that life is truly captured by what William said. Here's a young woman who is an advocate in the 1950s and feels constrained by her environment and by the norms of the society. And what does she do? She rises to the challenge to reimagine the possibilities of what she can do. And in the process, she not only creates an incredible career for herself, but that she pioneers the fields of public interest law and human rights law in a country and at a time when women often played less prominent roles. I mean, if there is an example of social entrepreneurship, it's this incredible ability to socially entrepreneur in the legal field and fundamentally change academic training in this country. Wits is truly proud that she's an alumnus. But I want to say at this point that we also need to apologize. We need to apologize that it took us so long to honor Felicia Kentridge. How could it have taken us this long when we've honored so many others? It took us so long to honor Felicia Kentridge. I want to say that we're also proud that the Wits Law Clinic continues to perform the role she pioneered. It still provides free legal service to those in our society who need it most, and in so doing provides students not only with practical legal training, but also teaches them about service and addressing the needs of society. In a lot of ways, it's therefore fitting that the wing of the building that houses the Wits Law Clinic should be named in Felicia Kentridge's honor, and it will be called the Felicia Kentridge Annex. It gives me great pleasure to unveil the plaque in her name. I do want to read the plaque because I think it's important and it captures Felicia's memory. Felicia Kentridge, 1930 to 2015, pioneer of public interest law in South Africa, human rights advocate and founder of applied legal studies at this university, was pivotal to the establishment of the Wits Law Clinic in 1973. Later, she co-founded the Legal Resources Center, the country's first public interest law firm, which won precedent-setting cases that advanced human rights and fundamentally weakened the apartheid regime. The Felicia Kentridge Annex, home to the Wits Law Clinic, is named in her honor. Wits, with her instinct for the possible, her skills, will and drive to bring her ideas to life, Felicia worked tirelessly to ensure that the dispossessed were able to access legal aid. A scourge to those who abused power, she never lost her outrage for injustice. The trends she set are still evident today, as the LRC and the Wits Law Clinic continue to fight for people's rights. Her vision that the Wits Law Clinic prepare final year law students for the legal profession by demonstrating how to use the law to effect positive social change remains a key component of the training of a Wits Law graduate. This plaque is unveiled on 6th October 2020 by myself, Professor Adam Habib. I want to, at this moment, ask each of you to stand and to raise your glasses. To Felicia Kentridge, may she continue to inspire generations to come. Felicia. Thank you.
Much has been said tonight about Felicia Kentridge and the Law Clinic, but I do want to conclude with a few words. Felicia was described in a Sunday Times article that I read recently as follows: a formidable human rights lawyer and scourge of the security police in a political trials. She was beautiful, charming, savvy, and innovative. In a deceptive, quiet way, she made things happen. She was extremely determined and as tough as nails. And so as a female heading up the law school, I take umbrage to her. I meant I honor her, and I take umbrage to the fact that women still today are fighting for a place in the legal profession. We're still relegated to doing custody cases, divorce cases. Those are still the fields and areas that women are sidelined into. And it's a great honor for me as a head of school to be part of this event where we honor a woman, and I'm going to say this, who was overshadowed a little by the men in her life. And so may we continue her legacy, and I want to say specifically to the young attorneys in the Law Clinic, you continue the work that you do, and may you be the Felicias in the future. Thank you, Thank you to the Kentridge family who is joining us tonight from the UK. Thank you to those who came in person. I know it's COVID and you've come along to this event. I want to say thank you to all of those who made this event possible. And finally, I want to say thank you to the director of that law clinic who has kept it together, that continues daily fighting the fight. Thanks.